Reporter Show, South Africa is a movie. So I don't know if you've noticed, but South African journalists are putting out so many important books right now. I think this is like the third show in a row where we're thrilled to welcome another author who has co-written a book on one of South Africa's most voted for, but also most controversial figures, Julius Malema. You might be aware of the fact that, as well as getting headlines for many different reasons, Julius Malema has been implicated in allegations about some financial wrongdoing, particularly around the scandal involving the collapse of VBS Bank. But there have also been investigative journalists looking for many years into different moments in Malema's career where he seemed to make a lot of money, but we are unsure how exactly he made that money. And so one of the co-authors of a brand new book called Malema, the other co-author who is not here is Paulie van Wyk, but please make some noise and welcome the phenomenal Micah Reddy from the International Consortium for Investigative Journalists, the Africa coordinator, is here. It's Micah Reddy, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back. We've had you on the show before. Tell me, what is this book about and not about? I actually remember from the back, you both wrote, this is not a book about Malema broadly, it's his money and the way that he built his career.
Well, exactly. That's basically it in a line. It's not really a biography of Malema, and I mean, in a sense it is, but we never got to sit with Malema. I've never interviewed him before, unfortunately. He banned Paulie and I and the organizations we worked for from EFF events. So I've never had the pleasure
Slightly
of...
toxic. Okay.
I've never had the pleasure of meeting him and getting to know him as a person in any real depth. What we do have, I think, remarkable insight into through all the work that Paulie and I have done separately and together on this book is Malema's network of patronage and Malema's finances. And so this book tries to tell the story of at least a certain type of corruption and Malema's patronage network and the EFF through the story of Malema, of the man himself. So it's, in short, a story about corruption told through the Malema experience.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So from the book, and please show the cameras the book so that people know where to go and find it. It's in bookstores right now. But like, for people who are interested in the book, do you and Paulie reckon that you've got enough good evidence to suggest criminal wrongdoing could be found against Malema in a court of law if there were a formal investigation?
Good question, and both Paulie and I think unequivocally yes.
Unequivocally yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Look, a lot of that information was already out there. So Paulie and I have been working on the EFF and Malema's various schemes and scandals for a very long time.
And what kind of evidence have you been working off? Because I think okay, so look, Julius Malema is one of the most talked about people in the country. I'm sure that you two have both already and will continue to get an enormous amount of hateful flack towards you just for even suggesting that Malema may have done any kind of criminal wrongdoing. And so I think the key question that I have is, what is the evidence material you guys have been working off, particularly public and private material, so that people can go, oh no, that's actually where this is coming from. It's not just a propaganda smear.
Right. It's a long answer, because Malema, as we know, has sort of careered from one scandal to the next over a really relatively short but illustrious political career. So there's a lot to take in. Part of the rationale for the book was that we wanted everything in one place. Right? We've been writing, lots of other journalists have been writing about Malema for a long time. There have been so many exposés on him and his network, but it was all sort of patchy and piecemeal. And it's been a long time since a book was written on him. Fiona Ford wrote an unauthorized sort of biography on him that included a lot of investigative work. But that was 2011, I think. So okay. More than a decade. And we wanted to include a lot of what was already out there in the book, plus some new exposés, some new information. So VBS has been well documented. But going back to, I mean, when Malema was politically very young, and actually very young, but when he started out in the youth league, he was already mixing politics and business in ways that were, to put it mildly, questionable. So we look at a lot of those early tenders that many would have forgotten about,
Is there lots of like
and
financial records and
a
stuff?
lot of financial records. So those early tenders involved his network of family and friends, and they were very much centered on Limpopo. So Malema sort of captured elements of the Limpopo government with his ally Castle Matale. He became this important power broker, and loads of small-ish, relatively small in the greater scheme of his various endeavors. Relatively small tenders were dished out to friends, but there were lots of them. So the scale was significant. Limpopo was ultimately bankrupted and placed under administration around that time. So there were those early tenders. Then there were the scandals with SARS. So SARS caught onto him, uncovered millions and millions in undisclosed income, and income that far outstripped what he could have been legitimately earning at the time.
And
That got him in a lot of trouble. And yes, then
Okay.
of course, this was all undeclared. There was the relatively well-known On Point scandal, but we bring more information to light on that as well, including some very explosive affidavits. That case was ultimately botched by the NPA, and the NPA has kept saying they will reinstate it, but they have failed to reinstate it years later. We showed that there was crucial evidence that could have been used in a case against Malema that we think is absolutely damning. Readers will judge. Then, of course, there's the VBS stuff, which has been relatively well aired, but we bring a lot more sort of color and detail to that. And the metros. So this is an aspect of Malema's political career, of his many scandals, that has got relatively little attention. But in the case of Tshwane, we show that he was involved, very deeply involved, in a crooked tender in which a contractor ripped off the city of Tshwane in this 500 million rand contract. And Malema and his close associate, Marshal Dlamini, scored 15 million off that contract. And it was completely irregular.
Okay.
I can go into the details of that, but that's quite a long story. The point is that there are various laws we think he would have clearly been in breach of, preventing the PRECA, and not to mention sort of parliamentary rules and obligations of disclosure and all that.
But I think for people who've just heard that, the question is like even just in a simple kind of conceptual line, like what does it mean to say Julius Malema was heavily involved in the decision over who got that tender? And how can you prove, or how have you proven, or do you have evidence to prove that he scored 15 million from that action?
Right. So we'd been hearing for a long time that Malema had real clout in the metros. This was after the 2016 election, when the EFF became kingmakers. And he had he had influence over key bureaucrats, and he could call the shots over placements and appointments of key administrative personnel in the metros. Some of that we are able to detail. We have evidence for some of that in the book. In the case of Tshwane, this particular tender, where the city was ripped off blindly, and the city seemed to be quite a willing victim in this case, because when I was at Amobungane, we wrote about the story and we alerted them, and they sort of didn't do anything, tried to brush it under the carpet, basically. But in that case, we could show the contractor was paying Malema and Marshal Dlamini, who's the Secretary General. He was a sort of key player, and probably still is, in Malema's sort of money network. But the contractor was paying this Malema front company that we have tied to Malema. I mean, it's absolutely clear that it is used for his benefit. And it was paying Marshal Dlamini's front company 15 million at key milestones in the awarding of this tender. So this went on for many months. And then after the tender was awarded, and it was so brazen that in the payment references, this contractor referred to things like fuel tender in the payment labels. He would use,
That's crazy.
He would
sometimes
be that obvious
alleged
about
criminals are really bad at their own jobs of like being a criminal. Like sometimes I watch movies and I'm like, shouldn't the real life criminals be at least as demure as this?
Yeah.
But like not that demure. It's crazy. Okay, so then the boring, painful, and obvious question, Micah, is that if you and Paulie have been able to collate and add new evidence and investigations into this book that from your guys' perspective so clearly shows evidence of criminal wrongdoing, why has he never been found guilty of criminal wrongdoing? Like what has stopped this process?
That's what everyone wants to know. And I don't have all the answers. We have some insights into how these cases, for instance, the On Point case, were botched. And that had to do in large part with just a lack of capacity on the part of the NPA, perhaps a lack of political will as well, or a lack of will to deal with powerful political figures and hold them to account. We know, of course, after the Zuma years that key institutions of accountability and institutions in the criminal justice system were gutted. So that is a big factor. Why cases haven't been followed up under the Ramaphosa administration, why given that Shamila Potoya suggests that the NPA has been turned around and they're ready to fight, why have these cases gone nowhere? Well, she's the best person to answer that. Okay. I would say, but there are evidently clear failings of accountability all along the line. So in the case again of the China fuel tender, and I keep going back to this because it's relatively unknown. The amounts are very big. Yeah. And I think the evidence that it was corrupt is absolutely overwhelming. Ultimately, a court threw it out, but no one has, as far as I know, been criminally charged in that. Right. And it is clear as day that there was fraud and corruption there. Just to give you one other example, you'll remember that Parliament gave Floyd Shivambu a slap on the wrist for receiving VBS money. Yes. Through his brother. It was a tiny, tiny portion of the VBS money that was ultimately looted, but he was stupid enough to receive that portion into his private bank account. Right. We know that Malema, through his front companies, got vast sums of VBS, got millions from the VBS scam, robbery, whatever you want to call it. But he escaped accountability in this case before Parliament because the money didn't go directly into his personal account. It was used for his personal benefit. Okay. And the reason that Parliament, eventually when they started looking into this after some complaints from the DA, the reason Parliament was never able to hold Malema to account and give him his slap on the wrist even, was that there was no real capacity to investigate. So they called in the Financial Intelligence Center, the FIC, which seems to be relatively good at doing its job and tracing illicit financial flows, said, oh, well, we can't be involved in this. They're notoriously secretive. They called in the liquidator. The liquidator said, no, they can only trace they only have jurisdiction, to trace the money one step from the looting. Basically, they couldn't follow the whole chain of the money flows. And so all Malema had to do was put a few steps in between himself and the source of the funds. And Parliament said, well, we can't show that he received any money. But he clearly, as the book shows, benefited from that looted cash.
That's so interesting. Well, just recently in South Africa in the last few months to years, there have been a number of cases where journalists have made a main story out about like some serious potential criminality and like inefficiencies in government to pursue that, and that has led into cases. Just today, actually, we finally got our big Tembisa Hospital kind of address announcement, so we'll see where this goes. But you and Paulie have invited people to judge for themselves. Please show the book one more time. It's Malema and the History of His Money, Power and Patronage from Micah Reddy and Paulie van Wyk. And as Micah invited you, judge for yourself. This is one of the most important, powerful and influential people in South Africa who more than anyone really in the last 10 to 15 years has changed our whole politics. So if he is involved in criminality, we all need to at least look at the allegations and the evidence before us. Micah Reddy, everybody, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you so much.